This soldier was resting on the battlefield when he saw a reflection in the pile of rocks. It turned out to be a photograph, but the thick dust covered the original appearance. He spat out a mouthful of spit. He wiped it with his thumb. It turned out to be a selfie of a beautiful woman. He put it in his pocket and turned to leave. The next second, Bert woke up again and learned that he was the only one left in the squad. His comrade also handed him a photo and said,
"I saw you pick it up. Looks like it saved you. Got yourself a guardian angel."
The next few days, Bert saw people in the barracks and asked them if they knew the person in the photo. But for months there was no progress. On his last mission before discharge, his comrades told Bert, "This photo is your lucky charm. Without Lady Luck's protection, you wouldn't be alive now. All the more reason for you to find her and thank her." The thoughtless words of his teammates stuck in Bert's mind, but in the midst of all the laughter, a sudden shell shattered this piece. But luckily, Bert survived once again. This photo seems to have a magic power. He survived again and again. After his discharge from the army, Bert came to live with his sister. The dog was the first to rush to greet him. Everything seemed calm, but soon Bert's post-war wounds began to reveal themselves. Whenever he heard a sound like an explosion or a gunshot, he would reflexively dodge. Even when his nephew called him up, he thought it was an enemy ambush and subconsciously put his nephew in a backhanded chokehold.
Hey, sorry, Tim. Sorry.
You know, the Corps can get you some help.
This is very painful for Bert. Only when he saw the photo, Bert's suppressed emotions will be relieved. He decided to meet the lucky girl in the photo. He hoped to find the answer to his own survival. He relied on the faint clues in the background of the photo. And so one man and one dog set out into the unknown city. They crossed the fields countless times. They spent countless hours in the twilight, asking countless strangers. After a continuous search, they finally found out the whereabouts of the girl in a bar. The girl in the photo was called Irene. She ran a pet hotel outside the city. Bert hurried to this place. At the first sight of the woman, Bert was attracted by her beauty. But before he could say why he was here, Avery thinks he's here to apply for a job and asks who he is. When she heard that Bert was a Marine, Avery faced a trace of pain, but she quickly avoided it. In the conversation that followed, she then learned that Bert had traveled 1,500 miles to apply for this job. Ellie subconsciously thought he was a dangerous man. She wanted Grandma to find an excuse to get rid of Bert, but after talking to her, she decided he wasn't such a bad guy, and he was good at training doggies, so she offered to hire him for her granddaughter. And so it was. Bert settled into the neighborhood.
How'd you get him to leave?
I gave him a job.
You what?
Gotta hire somebody.
Bert took the job very seriously too. He came in extra early on his first day of work. He not only fixed the collapsed eaves, but also cleaned up the broken tree branches in the yard. With his careful tidying, the surroundings were transformed. The messy kennel was cleaned up. The tractor that had gone on strike was revived. Looking at Bert's hard work, Grandma proudly told her granddaughter that she was right about him, but Ellie was still a little wary. She couldn't figure out what Bert was doing it for, because Bert always stares at her, whether in his spare time or during training. This makes Ellie feel very uncomfortable. Maybe it was a plan. Bert was like a wandering boat that had found the harbor of its choice. Whenever he saw Ellie, he could find peace in his war-torn heart. This day when Bert was leaving work, Ellie's son was helping him out. After dinner, they played chess together. They performed magic tricks together. Ellie saw how well the two got along. She gradually began to waver in her opinion of Bert. When Bert is ready to go back, he wanted to tell Ellie why he was here, but he couldn't get the words out of his mouth. Ellie returned home that day after visiting the graves. She stayed quietly on a bench in the yard. She didn't say anything, sitting for hours. Suddenly she lost control of her emotions and picked up scissors and cut the flowers and plants. She also pushed the plants over one by one. She vented her pain to her heart's content. Bert arrived at the sound of her voice. He hugged Ellie tightly from behind. Ellie had a brother. He also served in the Marine Corps, just like Bert, but he died in the middle of a mission. It wasn't just the death of her brother that made Ellie sad. It was the ambiguity of his cause of death. The local authorities were vague. There were even rumors that his teammates had been killed by mistake. This made Ellie feel very sad. Despite the fact that a year had passed, she still couldn't get over the loss of her brother. Bert quietly held Ellie in his arms. With Bert's patience and comfort, Ellie slowly calmed down.
Got a great laugh, you know that? I wish I could hear it more.
Why didn't you try telling me, Joe?
Because you're gonna have to get a few beers in me before I start telling you jokes.
Before I stop telling you Jackson, after this incident, Bert started to fit in with the family. He in effect took the place of Allie's brother. Bert taught her son how to row. Ellie watched from the shore. He made the broken home whole again. Ellie was smiling in a way she hadn't in a long time. But when everything seemed to be going right, the unexpected happens again. At the end of the week, Allie's ex-husband, a cop, took his son to a baseball game. But when he came back, his nose was bleeding, and she saw her ex-husband's indifferent attitude. Ellie was furious. A heated argument ensued.
Calm down. Now, let me tell you something. That's my son in there, too. And I can take that boy anytime I want. You got that?
Let go of my arm. Let go of my arm.
What's the matter?
You should do what she says. Let go of her arm.
Although my ex-husband let go of my arm, but from the look in his eyes when he left, you could tell it wasn't that simple. After Ellie's ex-husband left, Bert asked Ellie why he could do this to you. Why don't you get out of here? Ellie said her ex-husband was very well connected in the area. She didn't want to lose custody of her son. After all, he was Jack's father too. As long as she could be with her son, it didn't matter what she did. Bert was a little disappointed to hear that. He felt he shouldn't have gotten involved. So he said, "I just want to make sure you're okay." After that, he left in silence. Allie looked at his lonely back. She felt something indescribable. Looking at the picture of her son in the room, she decided to give herself a chance. So she rushed out the door and shouted at Bert.
Hey! When are we gonna get those beers?
I won't forget.
At night they went to the lake. It was their first date alone. They talked a lot that night. The relationship was becoming more and more ambiguous. Then they drove back to Ellie's doorstep. Just as they were about to go further, a police car drove up. He told Ellie to go home early. It was obvious that her ex-husband was causing trouble. Unfortunately, the beautiful atmosphere was broken. But when love comes, no one can stop it. What does a woman in love look like? On this day there was a woman on the windowsill with misty eyes. She looked outside at the man who was emitting testosterone. All kinds of images started to come to her mind. Grandma couldn't stand it.
Now that's a screenplay.
Ellie ran away in embarrassment. It's Ellie's son's birthday. Bert comes over too, but he's seen by Ellie's ex-husband. He threatened Ellie to cut off contact with Bert. Otherwise, he would take back the custody of her son. Ellie knew that her ex-husband would do anything. Despite her reluctance, she chose to leave Bert. When Ellie told Bert of her decision, Bert left without saying anything.
So, you planning to let him bully you all your life?
Grandma's words were engraved into Ellie's heart. It was her own weakness all these years. Looking at her son who was sleeping peacefully, she seemed to have an answer in her heart. The next day she went to her ex-husband and told him to leave her life alone. If you want custody, see you in court. After that she found Bert, who hadn't left yet, and became her true self. The next day she woke up and asked Bert why he was here. Bert said to come to you. At that moment, Ellie felt happier than she had ever felt before. But some people have a hard time. Ellie's ex-husband sat in the car outside the door all night. He decided to investigate this love interest that had come out of nowhere. He found out that Bert had come to see Ellie with the photos, and he understood that the death of his ex-wife's brother had never been solved. He took the photo when Bert wasn't home. Then he told Ellie that the reason why Bert came here, he's here to atone for his sins. Ellie immediately recognizes it as the photo she gave her brother earlier, her ex-husband's incitement. Ellie could no longer contain her anger. After her ex-husband left, Bert, who had noticed the photo was missing, came over. Ellie confronted Bert about where the photo came from. Bert finally had a chance to tell her why he was here.
Finding something like that, I promised myself that if I made it out, then I survived a lot of things.
That's exactly what her ex-husband said. No one would travel 1,500 miles to be here for a thank you. Allie is back in the throes of losing a loved one. Now she can't listen to Bert's explanations. She was convinced that Bert was the one who killed her brother. The reason he did it was to atone for his sins. She sadly told Bert to leave. The son behind the door saw Bert leaving. As a farewell, he gave Bert a book.
Take care of your mom, Mark.
I thought I was the guy next to you.
my best buddy. I'll always be next to you.
When Bert got home and packed his bags, he overlooked a picture in the book. That's when Bert realized. It turns out that his comrade is Ellie's brother. He planned to tell Ellie the truth before he left. On the other hand, the ex-husband who misses his wife and son also comes to Ellie's house. He misses the old days. He wants to start over with Ellie, but Ellie rejects him decisively. The 200-pound man began to reveal his true nature. He threatened to take his son away from him. The son next door was so scared that he ran out of the room. In the rainstorm, he ran to a swaying suspension bridge. The river was raging below. In a panic, the ex-husband tried to bring his son back. Instead, he fell and broke the suspension bridge rope. His son died hanging from the suspension bridge. The suspension bridge was soon broken by the raging river. The son was clinging to the side of the suspension bridge. Ellie's ex-husband could not care less about threats at this moment. He jumped into the river and swam to save his son, but his leg was stuck in the plank. Fortunately, Bert came in time. He rescued the child first. When he tried to go back to save his lover, the wooden house above fell into the river. Ellie's ex-husband was killed. A few days later, Bert was leaving. He told Ellie his brother had died in front of him to save other comrades. He saw the photo and realized that he had seen her brother before, and that he had coincidentally picked up the photo he had dropped. Watching Ellie drown in pain, Bert silently set off on his way home. But at that moment, a familiar voice called out to him. The two of them embraced happily in the warm sunshine, and that's the end of the film.
You belong here. With us.
Both are unfortunate. One lives in the shadow of war. One suffers the loss of a relative. At the same time, they are fortunate. They met each other in the most beautiful years. Cherish each other hand in hand out of the sadness. Sometimes fate is like that. It can bring misfortune. It can also bring good luck. No matter what kind of situation you are in, we must be hopeful in the face of life. Thank you for watching. That's all for today's story. Let's meet you next time.